Fellowship of the Broken, Making Sense of 12-Step Recovery by Angelo. Chapter 31, Cult Status. I attended just one AA meeting prior to going into rehab in the summer of 2010. We were then shipped out to 3 meetings per week whilst in treatment over a 4-week period, hence another 12 meetings. My early impressions were not favourable. My perception of 12-step recovery was that of a pseudo-religious cult that was intent on brainwashing me into their way of thinking. The scrolls on the walls in each venue contained the God word, which had no appeal at all. The message that I heard loudest was that I should keep coming back. This made me feel uncomfortable and further entrenched my suspicions. I could easily have walked away, but I didn't. As with many others, my life had fallen apart as a result of addiction. I was isolated, lonely and fearful of relapse. I had nowhere else to go, so when the time in treatment came to an end, I started to attend meetings 4 or 5 times per week. I was still stuck firmly in personal ego-mind. I trusted my own thinking because that was all I had ever known. I was willing to give AA a try, but only up to a point and only on my terms. I didn't feel that it was necessary to do the steps, and I certainly did not want a sponsor offering me guidance. I lasted 5 months and then relapsed badly. I went back to AA and asked how I should go about getting a sponsor. The person to whom I asked this question unexpectedly offered to sponsor me. We began to meet on a weekly basis, but I procrastinated over doing the suggested work. After 4 months, I relapsed again, and this time my drinking was the worst ever. My own behaviour frightened me. The addiction was progressing, and I knew for certain that there was only one direction that it was going to take me. The relapse lasted 10 days, but eventually I went back to the meetings and resumed work on the steps. My last drink was on the 24th of May 2011, and I've been sober ever since. The 12-step program initiated a process of transformation that is still ongoing. The AA fellowship opened my eyes to a new perspective, and my life today is enjoyable and purposeful. Spiritual practice is the foundation on which everything else depends. I take it seriously because I've seen what happens to friends and colleagues when we don't. As my recovery has progressed, so the experience and understanding has grown. My early perception of 12-step fellowship as a cult is not unusual, and it can be a big barrier to recovery. The definitions of the word cult in the Oxford English Dictionary are a system of religious worship directed towards a particular person or object, or a small religious group regarded by other people as strange or having too great a control over its members. Well, there will always be people who take a disparaging view of anything wholesome, so there's little point in debate. However, for the addict who is still suffering, I think it's very important to set out the facts as I see them, so that an informed decision can be made. The 12-step recovery is not religious. There is no worship of any person. The word God is completely open to individual interpretation. 12-step fellowships comprise many millions of people and are therefore not small. There is nothing strange about human beings wanting a life based on happiness, peace, love and unity. It's what everyone naturally wants. And 12-step fellowship has absolutely no control whatsoever over its members. There are no rules, regulations, requirements, fees, or any other form of control or restriction. In fact, 12-Step Fellowship is a wonderful example of how human beings can come together for mutual benefit whilst retaining freedom and individuality. 12-Step Fellowship does not come anywhere near meeting any aspect of either of the definitions of a cult. Any assertion to the contrary must have some hidden agenda, because it is simply not true. Having said that, the mistaken perception of a cult does nevertheless exist. I'm not aware of all of the reasons for this, but I can offer some suggestions as to why this might be the case. As mentioned previously, anonymity is an expression of humility. It's intended to keep the personal ego mind right-sized. Unfortunately, in more general understanding, anonymity is perceived as secrecy. This is reinforced by the idea that an addict may wish to keep his presence at recovery meetings confidential. This perception of secrecy adds weight to the misconception that 12-step fellowships have something to hide. We've seen that the personal ego mind needs repeated exposure to spiritual principles in order to begin the process of change. Well, this can be perceived as brainwashing. What is perhaps not realized is that the individual personal mind is already the result of conditioning or brainwashing. Parental influences, environment, education, peer groups, media and culture all play a part in creating the seemingly independent thinking of a personal ego mind. But rather than being authentic, it is the result of conditioning. The process of recovery disempowers the personal ego mind and allows consciousness itself to surface. This, in turn, cleanses the lens of perception which, if you like, can be interpreted as brainwashing. Well, the brain of an addict needs washing in this respect, otherwise there will be no recovery. The negative connotations around this term arise from misunderstanding and from the unscrupulous use of brainwashing techniques elsewhere. And these impressions can, unfortunately, increase the impression of cult status. The idea of attraction rather than promotion is spiritually sound, but this lack of publicity can also imply that 12-step fellowships want to remain unknown. This again raises a general suspicion that visibility is unwanted. The use of the word God clearly implies religion to those who do not understand. And the practices of prayer, meditation and selfless service also have strong religious connotations, but again, this is a misperception. There's a fine line between evangelism and trying to be helpful. Sometimes our attempts to carry the message of hope and recovery can be misconstrued. And many 12-step fellowship meetings are held in churches or church halls. These venues are typically low cost, and churches tend to support altruistic initiatives to be of service. However, many meetings have their own clubhouses and many others use community halls or other venues. The association of 12-step recovery with churches is understandable, but can lead to misleading conclusions. Finally, the symbolic logo of a triangle within a circle, adopted by AA in 1955, is perhaps another factor which gives the misleading impression of a cult. Interestingly, this symbol is not original to 12-step recovery. In AA, the circle stands for the whole world of AA, and the three sides of the triangle represent the three legacies, namely recovery, unity and service. The same symbol is used by a wisdom-based organisation called the Universal Order that was established in 1923. In their case, the circle is symbolic of the one principle, and the three sides of the triangle represent the fundamental predicates of truth, beauty and goodness. And the same symbol is said to have ancient spiritual significance, with the three components of mind, body and spirit together as one. And there are also obvious similarities with the concept of Trinity. Whatever the origins, in the early 1990s, AA World Services decided to phase out use of the symbol on its literature, letterhead and other material. In 1994, the AA General Service Conference resolved that the logo be discontinued on all conference-approved literature. Despite these decisions, the logo remains in widespread use today. There is an understandable attachment to the logo as a symbol of recovery, unity and service. But it's also fair to say that such symbolism does add to the myth of cult. The combination of these 8 factors, and perhaps more, provide enough ammunition to brand 12-Step Fellowship with aspects of cult status. For those of us already in recovery, this is of no great importance, because we know that it's not true. However, the primary purpose of 12-Step Fellowship is to carry the message of hope and recovery to the addict who still suffers. There are many of us in recovery, but there are a great many more who are not. If the general perception of cult status prevents an addict from engaging in meaningful recovery, as it nearly did for me, then leaving this issue unaddressed undermines the whole purpose of 12-Step Fellowship. The cult status of 12-Step Fellowship is an urban myth. Anything that we can do to gently debunk this myth would be consistent with the primary purpose of helping others into recovery.